My name is Jen Schaff, and I'm super excited to be here. I work for an organization called Elder Research. We are an AI and analytics enablement consulting organization. We were founded by, we were named after our founder, John Elder. So that's where the Elder comes from. Back in the 90s, and he came from academia, which is why it's Elder Research. So here we are 30 years later, and I'm still explaining to people we don't do geriatric studies, but we do AI and analytics enablement. So today I'm super excited to talk to you about, if AI is so smart, why are we still struggling to find that ROI? And so to set us in the mood, I want you all to imagine for a moment that it's 7:45 in the morning, you're getting ready for work, and your phone starts buzzing. It is the head chair of the organization. She's got a meeting at 9 o'clock, and she needs some answers. It seems that the AI inventory systems that was put in place to optimize performance is not working as well as it's supposed to. Numbers are down. In fact, they're more than 10% off, and nobody knows what's going on. Is it the data? Is it the model? Did the solution solve the wrong problem? If you're finding yourself in this scenario, you're not alone. Over 8 out of 10 analytics projects fail, according to research and surveys. And I've been in the analytics industry for many years, as I think most of you have. And I've heard the statistic over and over and over since I started years and years ago. And so last year I finally was like, well, are we just reinforcing each other's presentations by always putting the statistic up there? And so I dug around for some resources and found these ones up here. And it does turn out to be, according to surveys and people that are asked, around 85 projects do fail. Around the end of last year to the beginning of this year, that language started to change and more focus on ROI, which I think is a good thing, right? Because that is such a loose definition around fail. If you have an idea, a proof of concept, you do the data analysis and you figure out this is going to cost way more to implement than I'm ever going to get on return for it, and shelve the idea really quickly, is that a failure? I mean, I don't think so, but does that count in some of these statistics? So I think really changing that narrative to talk about the ROI is what this industry has been needing. But we still don't gain anything good in those statistics. We're still seeing from even MIT earlier this year projected that up to 95% of organizations are saying they get zero return on AI, as well as McKinsey saying it's in that 80% still. But what I think is really eye-popping about these statistics is that if you look at this last one that I pulled from an IBM report, that 85% of CEOs that were asked thought that by the year 2027, they would have ROI in their AI efficiency and analytics programs. And that's a big jump when we're talking about years and years and years of being stuck at this 80% failure mark. Now we're going to be at an 85% success mark in 2 years. And that's very eye-popping, very worrisome to some. So I'm a consultant, and like a good consultant, I want to help our organizations. I want them to achieve this, even before 2027. And so my first thought was, well, I'll develop out a framework, I'll develop out a list of things to do, things that need to be done, boxes to check off to be able to do this. And I went and looked on the internet to see what was already out there. I found there's tons and tons and tons of frameworks. This is how you do it. These are your considerations. And most of them are really, really good. So if we have all this information out there, why are we still struggling to generate the ROI with AI and analytics? All right. So I took a step back and I wanted to look at the winners and the strugglers. So in producing ROI, there are still some winning organizations that are getting lots of ROI from their AI, and there's lots and lots of organizations that are strugglers. So I wanted to develop an analogy to help me articulate, understand, and be able to help more clients get that ROI. And since it's fall, I developed out a football analogy. So this is the Buffalo Bills, and they're actually doing pretty good this year. My marketing director really, really wanted me to put the Chiefs up there, but the Chiefs aren't doing that good this year, and they lost to the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and I was not about to put Eagles up here in Atlanta in Falcon Country, so we're stuck with the Buffalo Bills as the winning team. For the strugglers, we have the Jets. Jets is my favorite team. I tried to not like them, and it just didn't happen. I guess once you pick a team, you can't get away from it. So we're going to use these two teams as our examples between our winners and our strugglers. So when you look at the winners, there's some differences between the winning teams, right? Their jerseys are colored differently. They've got different stars on their team. They've got different playbooks. But they all have a lot of really common similarities too, right? They have really strong leadership. They've got really good execution on all parts of their teams. They've got experience. They've got healthy bodies. They've got trust with each other. And so the framework that underlies all these winning teams is very robust, and it contributes to a winning, reoccurring wins in a winning season. But when you look at the strugglers look different. Some teams have a lack of leadership or a very toxic culture. So no matter how good you are, if you don't have the leadership to align your team and put you in place to reach that big picture, then you're not going to get very far. We have sloppy execution. You can have good leadership and players that just aren't getting the ball over the finish line. They're just not doing what they're supposed to do in their everyday actions, game-playing actions. Injuries, right? This is the San Francisco 49ers last year. They had a really good team. They had really good leadership, and I think they were really hamstringed by so many injuries on their teams. Their best players couldn't get out and contribute to the goal of the team. Some of these teams don't have solid offense or defense, right? There's multiple people that play in this area, and all the pieces need to be working right and executing well in order for them to succeed. As well as some teams are young teams. And this cycles, of course, because they're football players, but lack of experience can also really contribute to maybe a non-winning season for some of these teams. So then, after reading these, I got really, really excited because these 5 categories actually really encompass the top 8 key gaps in analytics that we see organizations are struggling with. So when we look at these key gaps, under lack of leadership, that often presents itself as strategy misalignment or fragmented analytics. We've got scattered effort, lack of prioritization, or using AI with ignorance. That's sloppy execution. Incomplete or poor data quality, injuries all the way. Failure to adopt, lack of offense, defense, right? If you've got one half of your organization working really well and the other not, that could be seen as the failure to adopt. And of course, lack of experience, which shows up often in data literacy gap and right-sized technology. So since the focus that I'm focusing on now is really defining what is actually holding a specific organization back because it's different across the board, I wanted to come up with questions that leaders could ask themselves in their organizations to really pinpoint if they are having these problems in their organization, maybe identify some of these gaps where their ROI is seeking out. And so I developed 8 questions, which I hope are really thought-provoking questions to see if these gaps exist in your organization. And so the first one of the biggest ones, and we've heard it talked about already today, is strategy misalignment. And so for strategy, we should be able to tie, the question to ask yourself would be, can I draw a straight line from our top business objectives to the insights that we produce each week? And this is a framework for a lot of organizations. You really want to start with the corporate objectives, and they really need to be supported by the departmental or the business unit objectives. Those business unit leaders have questions. They're subject matter experts. They have ideas, experiments, projects, proof of concepts that they can do to really see if they can support their growth objectives, which will support the corporate objectives, right? So an example of this would be if I sell chocolate candy bars, maybe my corporate objective is that we want less out of stocks this year. We want 1% less out of stocks this year. Well, the operations team might be, okay, well, we need a more resilient supply chain. One of the questions that they might ask themselves is, well, if we source a lot of our chocolate from Ghana, if the weather's bad in Ghana, do we see a reduction in chocolate raw materials, a couple months later? And if so, can we act back then when we see the bad weather and secure some raw resources from somewhere else that we don't normally secure? Following through that analogy, if it turns out to be true, and sources can be obtained when there's a key indication that they're going to be dropped or they're going to be reduced from Ghana, then that could feed directly into the corporate objective of reducing that out of stock. That ties directly from a corporate objective all the way down to what was produced through the analytics AI assessment, insights delivered and made a decision on. This seems pretty straightforward, but it's a thing that a lot of people miss, and I know a lot of people are talking about it today. For example, many, many years ago, I was on a team of data scientists that were working with a new organization, and they just gave us a bunch of data and said, here, give us some insights, find something for us that we can use. So looking through the data, they had some paid search data. I was like, great, this is easy, low-hanging fruit, knockout. So we looked at the paid search data. We determined some words that they were paying a lot of money for that didn't drive a lot of traffic to the website or within the website. And then there were words that they didn't pay very much for that really drove all the traffic to their website and through their website. And we were even able to put a dollar amount on that, right? So here, buy these words, forget about these words. They're not working for you. To the tune of about $6 million savings per year and increased website traffic, right? Was excited to tell the director. The director was like, that's nice. But they couldn't use it, right? Because I'm sure as much of many organizations use third-party agencies to manage all their paid search and that. And it wasn't a corporate objective that year to, really optimize their marketing. So it sat on the shelf, and that is a huge chunk of ROI that went down the drain. So the result of strategy misalignment is really generation of trivia. Yeah, we found a bunch of words you liked, a bunch of words that you're paying too much for, but you can't do anything about it. A lot of busy analytics work and not a lot of business transformation. Another one we find happens when there's a lack of leadership is fragmented analytics or too many teams and not enough alignment. So this happens when there's not a strategic vision developed by the leadership in an organization, and all the different departments and business units set up their own analytics. Marketing hires a couple people and makes some definitions and does some analytics, and operations does the same. But the problem is when these people start to talk to each other, they don't come up with the same numbers. And so this results in distrust in the data, distrust in each other, and really not a cohesive strategy for the organization to use these insights. And this was really apparent to us one time. We went and worked for Canadian Blood Services. So they had an organization set like this, and we were contacted by the executive team. They wanted us to, develop an enterprise strategy and get these people out of their silos and working together. So we had a meeting with the different analytics people from each of the silos. And they came in, and it was eye-popping because, Bob from marketing would look at Tony from operations and be like, I didn't know you worked in analytics. But then what even got worse is like a little bit later, kind of a heated argument developed because they were talking about donors and how their blood donors and how their numbers didn't match up with each other. Well, it turned out they were all defining it differently because they'd all started in their little grassroots growing of their little analytics organizations, using different definitions and different ways to get at the data, right? So one of them was using a donor was somebody who donated blood in the last 6 months. Somebody else was somebody who donated in a year. And even somebody else was like, well, somebody who's donated more than once, because those are the people that we're really trying to get after to continue to have them come back and donate blood. So the result of this is decreased revenue and trust, multiple sources of truth and distrust of data and our analytics is really going to slow the initiative down and make it even slower for enterprise and corporate-wide adoption of these processes that can really generate the ROI we're looking for. Okay, moving on to sloppy execution. Back to this graph that I showed you for the first one. As organizations scale and get better and start to recognize that AI and analytics can really take over some of that manual time-consuming work and free up our brains to do, really important strategic stuff, they start to see how their ideas can generate cost savings, time savings, whatever the corporate goal is for them for that year. And you get a lot of ideas. I have yet to meet an organization that can do all of the ideas that have been proposed to them, even the ones that are just at the beginning of scaling up. So being able to prioritize these projects effectively and quickly gets them moving, gets them done, and gets them out the door, rather than a lot of competition or political fights to see which projects happen next. And this new prioritization often results in scattered effort. And so this is one of my favorite analogies for that, is that if your corporation's effort is looked at as in water, you can fill a pitcher up. You have, one or two main goals that you're working on. Your effort goes into that. It's easy to carry. It's easy to see who's holding it. It's easy to define leadership and roles and responsibilities. But when you're pouring all your effort across many different projects, you've got lots of little cups. They're all hard to carry. Nobody knows who owns what. Stuff is spilling out all over the place. And so it really becomes essential both for moving those projects along as well as being able to utilize the results that come from those projects. Slow, underwhelming results. Another sloppy execution is using AI with ignorance. So this is I guess it's an old book by now. It came out in 2016, but it's the first one I read that really talked about the dangers of using algorithms without really understanding what was behind them. These can be really hurtful. In the worst case scenarios, people get fired. I'm sure people could, maybe even get killed if something wasn't done right. On the less harmful side, it's business decision makers, right? They've got, this insight telling them they can do this, and they're very confident in their decisions. All the while, they're driving their bottom line down more because they don't really understand what the insights are telling them. One of the most compelling stories of this book, I think, was about a teacher who, by all accounts, was just loved by her families, by her students. Everybody adored her. But the statewide algorithm pinged her as being non-effective because her test scores didn't improve enough. It didn't take into account that, maybe she taught in a low economic area of the state, or didn't know what the family situations were from, or even some students that had been transferred to a class that didn't have her as a teacher all year. And she ended up getting fired for this. So, and I have us all in bold on this one because it's all important. Because at the very least, you're making bad decisions, costing your company money. People can get fired. People can lose their jobs. And some people can get really, really hurt. Incomplete and poor quality data, which I will argue is like having an injury on the team. And I know this makes me look like a sports fanatic. I'm really not, but I just love this picture so much. I had asked ChatGPT a while ago to develop me a picture of a moody, great basketball player. And it gave me a basketball player with 4 arms. And I was like, that is fantastic, right? Because if a basketball player had 4 arms, they probably would be really, really good. Somewhere, we can argue it was prompt engineering, but we can also argue somewhere in the ChatGPT brain and the data they had back in its system, it didn't tell it that basketball players only have 2 arms, or, there's something wrong with the data that our AI generated a result that really wasn't quite right, really not what we're looking for. And if we're going to run around looking for 4-arm basketball players, then we're going to be really, really disappointed. So these decisions definitely cost revenue, definitely can cost customer loyalty. So switching over to lack of defense and offense. And so for me, this is like not having a cohesive team across the organization. This picture is actually really compelling to me. I'm a little bit afraid of flying. I couldn't really find any pictures that really emphasized failure to adopt. So I looked up failure to take off. And this is the one that came up, and it kind of scared me a little bit. This plane is okay. I read up on it. I'm sure the pilots and the passengers were scared for a little bit, but they did eventually take off. But failure to adopt and not getting your solutions utilized and trusted in the organization is a big problem because you've spent all this money and nothing's coming from it. So one example of this is we did a project for a manufacturing organization. They manufactured, let's say, 5 items, A, B, C, D, and E, on one manufacturing line, most days, right? And so they had the order. They've always done it. We do A first, we do B, we do C, we do D, we do E. But there's always little tinkerings that need to be done between the manufacturing products. Like something needs to be cleaned, a part needs to be switched out. And so we looked at the data to see if we could reorder how they did those, how they sequenced that manufacturing line to create more uptime on the machine and less downtime. And even so, say they don't need to produce product B that day, can the order change even more now that you're not having to consider that to really optimize the efficiency of the machines? Well, what happened was, this was all a good idea up in the corporate office. We had some data, but none of the people in the manufacturing plant were consulted or brought along on the idea. And so this one failed for two reasons. One, because they didn't really trust the data. That goes back to the four-arm basketball player, because the data was often manually entered. But there was also certain things about the way they did have it organized that made, switching maybe the order from A to B to A to C was not feasible because of timing of deliveries of raw materials or the way that the necessary components of the machines were stacked in the back. So this huge wasted investments, missed opportunities, stagnant performance, and really not developing a culture that is excited about using data, AI, and analytics to do these kind of routine things so we can free up our minds to do, better, strategic, arguably more fun things. Okay, so on the lack of experience, this is my pile of shiny stuff. This is like squirrel. I think we all know people in organizations that are like, look at this tiny tool. It's really, really cool. We should get it. And this also goes back to, really choosing the tools that are going to solve the problems that you've defined in your organization, not looking at a tool that's just like, wow, that's really cool, everything it can do. I bet we can find a use for that. One of the stories I have for this kind of scenario is we were asked by an organization that was our client if they should buy this software as a service package. And so we spent a day with them, learned how to use the tool. They actually let us peek around in their analytics, and they were pretty good. And so all was good. And we went back to the organization that was paying us to look at this and talked to 3 executives and said, what are you going to do with this tool? And all 3 of them supposed they could use it for 3 different things. They each had their own idea, which clearly indicated to us that this was not being sought after to solve a specific problem. And there was no discussion on how the insights that came from this tool would be used in decision-making to push that needle forward for ROI. So it's been 5 years later, and it costs them $1 million a year. And as far as I know, they're still not using it. And it's a pretty cool little tool. But if it doesn't solve a problem that you're currently trying to solve and you don't know how you're going to use the output, then it just becomes tech clutter and wasted dollars. And finally, data literacy. Are teams equipped to ask the right questions? So when you're looking at kind of an AI and analytics inside your organization, you do have the tech people, the people that, prepare the data, the people that make the models and all that. But really, those lines in between, those arrows are decision makers from directors and from SMEs that kind of have an idea of what could be in the data that we can look at to produce some insights that we can use to make decisions. The problem is, if these people that are making these decisions, deciding what those arrows are going to be, don't know enough about data, then they can come to wrong conclusions and they can ask the wrong questions. So an example here would be, one organization we worked with tried out a marketing campaign in a certain region of the U.S., and they got a 15% sales increase. And they're like, yeah, we hit gold, let's roll it out to the entire country. They rolled it out to the entire country, and 6 months later, they didn't have that sales lift. Their margins are shrinking. This wonderful campaign fizzled out. And what it turned out to be was that in that region that they first tested in, their competitor had closed all their stores. And so that's where the actual sales lift had come from, not from the marketing campaign. And so this is really the crux of data literacy and why it's really important. It's not about reading dashboards or accepting a result or accepting a fact, but really knowing how to probe into the story, interrogate the story behind those numbers, know what questions to ask, be able to kind of figure out what those missing variables are. Otherwise, you're just chasing illusions and not ROI. So those, missed opportunities for meaningful impact. Okay, so winners, positive ROI achievers, I got to tie it back to the beginning of the presentation when I was talking about football. Really, there's 3 steps that we take. We spot the gaps, and hopefully I've given you the information here needed to spot those gaps and be able to determine where the ROI is slipping out in your organization. Addressing these gaps systematically and realigning your analytics effort to cinch the execution. I think a lot of people at this conference are more of the practitioner technical type, or at least have been kind of raised up in that area. So I didn't cover a lot on clinch the execution, but that is definitely something that we can talk more about. And finally, bring everyone along. Analytics and AI, as you all know, doesn't work in a back room. If you have your brain's all saying, this could be an exciting problem, but don't consult the people that are, working in the field or working in the retail stores or working on the manufacturing plants. They're not going to be able to buy in, or worse, they're not going to be able to input their subject matter expertise to really shape and model the solution that's going to provide insights to drive that strategy forward, to see it solved. Okay? So I have no idea how fast I went through that or slow. My name is Jennifer, and let's connect.